Breaking the spell!
Hi guys, welcome to Breaking the Spell. I'm here with Ari Zahav. How you doing today?
Doing pretty well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So Ari is actually, he's a political consultant and a world traveler. You have been to many countries, especially the Middle East. You've actually consulted with people part of the political process over there. So, it's like you've really helped or tried to help at least.
So my interest in the Middle East, I would say, dates back to my childhood. Let's get into the psychoanalysis of it. No, in all seriousness, it goes back a long time from the point when I was in the army and I first learned about the Kurdish people, Kurdish issues, and understanding that America had an ally. There was an entity in the region that was close with us in terms of ideology, in terms of democratic values, but it's a war-torn region. There's always conflict there. So when I was in my early 20s, I was looking for what to do, what work to get into, should I be involved with international relations, international development, in one extent over another. And I just cold called people. And one of the people that I cold called was a guy who was in semi-retirement. He was Tunisian, I think fourth or fifth in line in the United Nations during his career, during the height of his career. And he was nice enough to grab coffee with me. And
he lived around here?
No, this was in New York City.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And so
I
sat down with him. Yeah, I mean, cold calls are way undervalued.
They're horrible, but they work.
If you're looking to reach out to a person and you're not asking them for money, if you're asking them for advice or direction,
well, that's the best kind of cold call, maybe.
yeah, people are willing to give you a lot. And if you think, these people are getting paid $200 or $300 an hour, you can look at that piece of advice as a $200 or $300 piece of consultation.
They might charge you.
Well, this gentleman was nice
right?
enough to just grab coffee with me, and he sat down.
That's cool.
This guy literally forgot how many treaties he had signed between warlords or between warlords and governments or governments and governments. I mean, it got so out of hand. But essentially what he said to me, which changed the direction of my life, was that no matter how many treaties you sign, people will always go back to war if the young men who are fighting don't have jobs to return to. And so that's kind of where my interest in innovation started to peak. Innovation doesn't necessarily mean something massive on the tech scale. It can be something more local. It can be about how do we build networks of scale? How do we build systems that are integrated to people who are just getting into their careers or people who are looking to change careers? How can we take advantage of all of that for the sake of cooperation and collaboration as opposed to competition?
So, from what you were saying, it kind of struck my mind, and I don't mean to pivot the subject that much, but I think when it comes to local community, because like you're saying, the innovation needs to come from local cooperation, I really kind of think the state and big government gets in the way more than anything. Despite good intentions, I really think just that bureaucratic structure mechanism.
Well, I mean, it's probably a good place to start to point out what is the function of government, or what is the function of
that's
state.
an episode.
That's an entire episode.
That's an entire, you know what? Episode 3 could just be function of government. You got it, Art. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about your experiences? Because I know you traveled the country. Mm-hmm. What'd you say? You went to 20 different states plus DC?
I went to 19 or 20 states plus DC.
And it was undecided 2020. You were asking people about the presidential election. You got a sense of people's, like, the whole political situation, the two parties, like, how do people feel about it?
Yeah, so it was very enlightening.
Yeah.
So my goal was to put myself into the position of an undecided voter, that rare person who's not public on social media, who doesn't exist at the forefront of our minds.
The silent majority.
Sighting. I don't know if it's the silent majority, but
it's a phrase people
use. It's definitely a large enough constituency that it could sway elections, right? And I really wanted to understand why people would vote the way they would vote, why they would hold the priorities the way they held them, or their loyalties. And I understood that if I was a Biden supporter and I approached someone in the street and I said, hey, I'm curious to know about who you support in the election. And they say, well, who do you support? And I would say, well, I'm a Biden supporter. Well, now that kind of influences what they're going to say.
Yeah.
They're going to be speaking to an audience. They might be saying, they might be raising a level of aggression because they're a Trump supporter, or they might be speaking to the camera or speaking to onlookers and trying to influence them as opposed to trying to influence me, right? I wanted to get the best possible arguments, and I couldn't get that as a Biden supporter, and I couldn't get that as a Trump supporter.
Yeah.
Seriously, the only way to do that would be as an undecided voter. Now, I'm a policy wonk. I'm really familiar on a number of issues across the spectrum. Obviously, many issues I'm not familiar with, but it was difficult for me to find a reason why I would be an undecided voter and still put myself into a place where I could allow myself to get swayed by the end of the election. But I really saw two realities at play. And anyone who doesn't acknowledge these realities is either uninformed, in my opinion, or unwilling to acknowledge the truth.
Maybe, yeah.
Now, a person could say, I prefer to vote for Trump because I realize the goods are better than the bads. There's a cost-benefit analysis at play. The same thing is true with Biden. And people have a right to their priorities. People have a right to say, I care more about healthcare than I do about defense. I care more about veterans issues than I do about foreign relations or healthcare or any number of things. That's American freedom. That's personal freedom, right?
Yeah.
But the issue is that you really had two horrible candidates. You had
It's always like that.
you had a person. No, it's not always like that, and it hasn't always been like that, especially not to the same extent. I voted for Hillary Clinton twice in 2016. I registered as a Democrat for the primary, then unregistered before the regular election, and voted for her anyway. And she was a terrible candidate. She was a really bad candidate. But I believe that she had more experience. I believe that she could have been a sensible decision maker. I believe that she would have had authority. And even though not as much legitimacy as a candidate during normal times would have had, I believe that she made sense. I looked at Donald Trump and I thought to myself, this is a person who's dishonest, lacks conscience, can't provide clear leadership, has a poor record in many senses, and on a number of issues from 2016 to 2020, I saw him put in place policy which in many cases was disturbing, but on the other hand, there was certain brilliance involved.
He's got a gut.
He's got.
He works with his gut.
He's got a gut. And
Not his mind, you know what I'm saying?
the U.S. federal political system was too corrupted by posturing, by people being worried about how they looked like, both on the Democratic and Republican side. There is an unwillingness to acknowledge that both political parties had gotten into ruts. I was a big supporter of Barack Obama. I thought he was a fantastic representative of what I wanted the country to be. But I was also concerned with a number of policy issues he put in place. So when it came to 2020, I saw that we had a person who lacked a conscience, who was dishonest, who had made some really, really amazing policy decisions, but was a dishonest person. On the other hand, we had a person who was clearly, forget about age, let's think more about cognition, about the ability to perform well in public settings.
He's got a lot of experience, though, right? He was
Maybe
a senator
too much.
for decades.
I
right?
mean,
or what was it?
I don't think
senator?
we should ever restrict the ability to run for office based on immutable qualities.
Yeah.
That being said, he's an elderly man, and we should
So
be
is Donald Trump.
Yeah, so was Donald Trump. So long story short, I ended up not voting for president. On one hand,
Cool.
I had my conscience at play, which wouldn't allow Donald Trump. And on the other hand, I had common sense at play, which wouldn't allow me to vote for Joe Biden. And by the way, I think Joe Biden is a pretty decent human being. I think he's a solid guy. I think
It's not that hard to be a decent human being.
if you're a politician, you'd be surprised.
Well, that's... Make parking free in West Hartford for all residents of West Hartford. So let's keep in mind that it brings in about $3 million a year,
Sure.
according to what I was looking at the 2020-2021 budget. So I'm saying that West Hartford residents shouldn't pay, or maybe there could be like some kind of nominal fee that's part of an annual, like a property tax, include like a little fee to include parking. But my goal is to find ways to just not spend money. In government in general. So I'm just saying, West Hartford residents, you can park. Just relax. You can park. Pension. They do want to enhance the public school security, and part of that is to build metal detectors for visitor entrances. So not the main entrance, but for visitors to schools, they want to go through security and a metal detector. Now, the cost of doing this is $3.7 million. I'm not really sure how I feel about that.
That
we
sounds...
went to the public. You went to the public schools too. Yeah, so it's just like we went through it, and I don't know why they have to change it now. It's interesting.
These security measures, I think, are extremely close to... I really want to bet on people's best. I really want to give people the benefit of the doubt. And there could be research at play that I'm not familiar with. But without knowing what that research is, I'm highly suspicious of these security measures.
Yeah.
One, if it's just for visitors, then...
But that's like a slippery slope, right? Then they'll build more. It's like...
No, I don't think that's the issue. I think what I find frustrating is this posturing.
Yeah, it is. It's more of the appearance.
If a person
we look safer.
If a person really wants to shoot up a school, God forbid,
they won't go through the visitor entrance.
They won't go through the visitor entrance. Sandy Hook affected so much in terms of school security policy, and not just in Connecticut but in America.
Right. Sure.
And we would never want something like that to happen again. But we also have to understand that this was a problem with an individual.
Right.
A person who had clear mental health problems.
Other people who might think this is a great idea, it's like we're kind of telling them, no, it's a horrible idea. You're just making yourself feel better by doing it. You're posturing yourself. So you're virtue signaling, essentially.
There is an argument to be made that we should make people feel more comfortable, more at ease, more secure about people sending their children to our public schools, and I think that's completely fine. But we should also be willing...
You must do it in a way...
Well, we should be willing to discern... You should be willing to discern the difference between legitimate threats and unlikely but loud threats, such as what we saw in Sandy Hook, which was objectively awful. I remember when that happened, I was in the Middle East, and a friend of mine said, "Aren't you from Connecticut?" And I said, "Yeah," and I think I cried when I read the news. It was an awful thing. And we should take measures to reasonably prevent something like that in the future. But even if you're going to look at something like gun violence, right? The vast majority of gun violence, first of all, about 2/3 of gun violence is suicides. So if we're excluding that, that's the majority of the statistics. But even beyond that, the majority of gun violence is from handguns, and it doesn't occur in mass shooter situations. And those situations are disturbing because there's a certain level of sex appeal that the news picks up on that makes it mimetic and viral, and it makes it so that people will tune in. But I don't see putting in security measures on a large scale for visitor entrance.
Save the money.
Save the money.
Well, Ari, we're breaking the spell. How do we break the spell?
I think it's by having real friendships with people who are extremely diverse.
Well, people you disagree with. Talk to them.
I think you should have friendships.
Go
with
have lunch
people-
with them.
You should have friendships with people who you enjoy the company of.
Well, yeah, obviously.
And sometimes those are going to be people you agree with, and sometimes they're going to be people that you disagree with. But some people, I think myself included, I think you as well, enjoy the act of fencing. And this is what we're doing. We're mental fencing,
Mental fencing.
right? We're mensing.
We are mensing. Without a doubt, we're mensing.
Breaking the spell!